It is quite an honor to say that I have with me the man who is the former national Greco-Roman wrestling champion. He aspired to the heights of becoming a member of the United States Olympic wrestling team. Yes, and of course that's the man we all know as Bob Roop.
Guys, and welcome to the inaugural edition of the Wrestling Stoop podcast here on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. And of course, per the usual, I am Ray Russell, but joining me here this week is the true host of this show. He is a former Michigan State high school wrestling champion, and after a brief stint at Michigan State University, he decided to join the U.S. Army, where he made the all-service wrestling team. He would later return to college at Southern Illinois University with a record of 66-18 on the mat, including an amazing 16-3 record in his senior year. He's also a former national AAU light heavyweight champion. He even represented his country of the United States when he competed in the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City as part of the Greco-Roman wrestling events. After that, he made the decision to go pro in 1969 and never looked back. Yes, he held more than 24 pro wrestling championships over his 2-decade career in the ring. He received the Cauliflower Alley Club's prestigious Lou Thez Award in 2009. He was also inducted into the Tragos Thez Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame back in 2006. And even more recently, he was inducted into the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and Museums class of 2019. And there's a lot I'm leaving out here, guys, but I'll leave that for him to tell you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to his show, one of the all-time greats of the territory era, the legendary, the sometimes controversial, the incomparable, the one and only, Mr. Bob Roop. Bob, welcome to your Wrestling Stoop.
Well, thank you, Ray. It's really a privilege to be here, and I think that we've had the start of a beautiful friendship here. For you listening out there, we've taken a couple of months to get ready for this. We didn't just jump right in and say, okay, we'll just start out and see what happens. We've been planning, and Ray has been doing a great job of setting things up, getting us ready to go so that once we do start, we can get our message or our work to you to share it, so you can share it with us. Thanks for that great build-up. It's very heady. It's very heartwarming to hear that. But at the same time, I've got a little bit of a bone to pick here that I'm going to just mention briefly. We'll get to the details later, but nothing that an old retired wrestler likes better than sharing stories. But some of them are very meaningful. They have to do impacted my life and other people's lives. But one of the things going on right now is I just heard this morning, coincidentally, I heard a couple other wrestlers that were knocking me. I mean, I've been retired for 30 years, and they're still knocking me for something that happened over 30 years ago. And it wasn't like something I got arrested for or put in jail for or in any way penalized for. It's just a difference of opinion. So I'm going to be answering to those accusations. I'll mention a couple of names. The people involved were Ron Fuller and Kevin Sullivan. And that's all I'm going to say for now. Those out there who listen to the podcast probably have heard my name mentioned by Ron Fuller a few times. So, but with that in mind, in spite of that nice introduction that Ray gave me, I want to add a couple of things. During the time, and again, it has to do with credibility toward my character. I've been retired for about 30 years. The reason I did retire was because I had young children, and I decided I wasn't going to be on the road and miss their growing up. So I went from being a full-time pro wrestler to being a Mr. Mom. And the 10 years I was Mr. Mom were actually the best years of my life. and they have paid off. The fact that my two sons that I was there for back then, we're still together. We're in a home together. They're in their 30s now, but we're still together. So, those years are paying off. I mean, treasure that I would never have gotten just from having some kind of pro wrestling retirement fund, if there was such a thing. But with that in mind, talking about my own boys, they have to listen to this kind of stuff too about their name. Their name is Roop also.
Right.
And they have to listen to their name being besmirched and look at me and say, well, what's that all about, Dad? And so I want to repeat that in the 10 years I was Mr. Mom, when the boys were old enough, we got into Scouts. And in the 10 years I was involved in Scouts, I was a den leader. I was a cub master for our pack. My wife and I ran day camps during the summer for 8 years. We had probably between 15 and 1,800 kids that came out for a day camp, not every year, but in total during those 8 years. And I was honored to receive the highest awards locally, the Cub Scout of the Year 1 year, the Order of Merit another year, and the Silver Beaver Award another year. And those are the highest recognition you could get at a local level, like just from our Cub Scout district. Once the boys were both in school, I went back to school at age 63 to become a special ed teacher. And through 3 years of working full time, including taking classes in the summer, I became accredited as a elementary school K through 7 and special ed K through 12. I worked in that capacity for another 8 or 9 years. I had been substitute teaching up to that time, but I wanted to know what I was doing. And my own son had getting a special education for 11 years, and I saw how much it had helped him. So I thought I could do the same thing and help other children. Mm-hmm. And I was, the first 10 years out of the business, I didn't pay any attention to wrestling at all. Not because I had any grievances against it or anything. It's just, when you're in it, you're so active, you're so involved.
You're in the bubble.
Yes, you're in the goldfish bowl. The bubbles is actually even better. Goldfish can get out of the bowl. You're in the bubble. You're right, Ray. You can't get out. So, I wasn't real interested. I was doing things with my kids, but then these Hall of Fames started coming along, and Ray, you were kind enough to mention a couple of them, but I had a short career. I was active 15 years, and I stayed around kind of promoting and doing some hit and miss stuff. Ole Anderson hired me as an agent for Ted Turner in 90. I worked about 9 months, and then it was taking too much of a toll at home. I had my wife and small child. My wife was being frustrated by having to raise our son alone, so I decided to leave the business, and that's when the 10 years as Mr. Mom started. But in that 15 years of amateur wrestling, and actually 13 of amateur and 15 of pro, so about 30 years total.
I think you're undercutting yourself on the pro, Bob. I think you went a little longer than that, but yeah, I mean, 15 years strong on top, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I was just thinking about that I didn't want to lose my train of thought here, and I apologize for cutting the Bob Roop off, guys. So I don't want to piss your fans off, though, is what I'm saying. I know I won't piss you off because we're cool. We've been talking so much over the last couple of months. We just kind of hit it off right away. You kind of think the way I think, and you say things that I'm thinking, and it's really cool that way. But I just wanted to point out real quick, and that was what I wanted to touch on too right at the top of the show, was for anybody who thinks this is just going to be a program about your career, I mean, it's so much more than your in-ring career. You did so much behind the scenes. You were so involved as a booker, and as you said, an agent. A lot of people, including myself, I wasn't even aware for many, many years that you were an agent in WCW back in that 1990, that Jim Herd era, if you will, with Ole booking and things of that nature. So that's pretty cool as well to find that out. You've told me at least one story. I can't wait till we get to it one day. A backstage incident, involving Lex Luger. And that story's out there, but I think you maybe have a little more detail than I've actually heard this story being told in the past with Lex Luger and a little incident up north with the Junkyard Dog. So, but there's just so much that people don't understand, that the people, not just the wrestling in the ring or how everything worked behind the scenes, but you have really big insight into Eddie Graham, Gordon Solie, Dusty Rhodes, the Funks, the Briscoes. You talk about listening to that JYD pop down in Mid-South. There's just so many great stories coming, Bob.
Well, thank you, Ray. And I agree. There's a lot of stuff that what you're touching on is something that relates to me. When I was in Charlotte a couple months ago, we did a seminar of myself, Kevin Sullivan, Steve Kern, Jerry Brisco, and Brian Blair. And we did a seminar on championship wrestling from Florida. And they had a moderator who was, there was maybe 100 people in there. And we had a moderator that was asking questions first about Gordon Solie and then about Eddie Graham, or maybe not in that order, back and forth. But the point was, they kept talking about everything was so great. Eddie was so great. He did this, he did that. Gordon was so great. He did this, he did that. While that was all great, that's all fluff stuff, because you're overlooking the fact that Eddie Graham killed himself. He shot himself. So everything wasn't all great, was it? And Gordon Solie was a very unhappy person. And a lot of people never saw that. But Gordon was a miserable person. And I had a chance to experience some of his misery firsthand. It was directed at me. And so, and again, I'm not knocking these guys because they're gone. They're gone, and I'm not knocking them. I just read the Solie Chronicles, written by his daughter. About a month ago, I read it, and I wanted to know more about Gordon. And she says everything that I'm saying. She said that he was very unhappy. It was his childish upbringing, and how he lost his father. He never knew his original father, and his stepfather was nasty to him. And anyway, I can validate the things I'm saying. I know his son, Gennard. I like Gennard. I respect him. I don't want to hurt his feelings, but I think it's a tribute to me that the wrestling fans come to these reunions and they seek me out, even if it doesn't matter if it's not 1,000 of them, if it's 5 or 1. The fact that they seek me out, I feel like I owe them more than just platitudes. I think that they want to know, they know about what they saw on TV. They know about what's in the pictures and all that. I think they want to know what's going on behind the scene. And that's where the really important stuff is, because what you saw on TV and in the house shows was icing on a cake. And that cake was not always made up of like chocolate pudding or whatever. That cake was sometimes made up of stuff from the sewer and just some absolute crap that it bears watching. One of the things that never comes up is that wrestlers from day one always complained about payoffs from promoters.
Sure. Yeah.
And in my career, the only promoter that I thought paid me fairly was Paul Bosch.
Okay.
Every other one I worked for, I felt like still owes me money because they didn't pay me fairly. And
even Sam Muchnick, I heard he was a pretty good payout guy.
When I worked just a couple of shows in St. Louis.
Not too much in St. Louis.
Sam wasn't running at the time. It was somebody else. And I don't remember if that payoff was fair or not. And maybe I shouldn't include Sam, but Sam got me started, so I have a lot of time for him. But he was in effect head shill for a racket. So
sure, the NWA, longtime president of the NWA. Right, I got you.
Well, think about it, Ray, and you folks out there. The football, NFL, and the National NBA and Major League Baseball, they all have charters and rules and regulations.
Right.
For an organization at one time that actually was drawing more people because they ran year long, where these other sports are seasonal.
Right.
Wrestling was drawing more fans per year than any of these other sports on their own. And yet with no regulations, no rules, no bylaws. I mean, you couldn't set buildings on fire or anything like that, but only civil law. There were no regulations about what you did. There was no arbitration on pay, or it was illegal from day one for them to treat wrestlers as they treated you as an individual proprietor. Rather than
independent contractor nowadays, they call it. Yes,
a contractor, right. Thank you for correcting me. Individual contractor as opposed to an employee. As an employee, they would have had to pay for workman's comp for you, and they would have had to give you medical insurance.
Right.
And the definition of being an employee was if the person in charge told you what to do. Well, they told us everything to do. Everything. You got to be here at a certain time, be there, do this, go out in the ring, do this. They told you everything to do. Mm-hmm. How are you a private contractor where someone else is telling you exactly what to do.
Right.
So they managed to avoid that all those years. They went before National Congress for having a monopoly.
Right.
A few times. So, that's led to all kinds of like unseemly practices. Well, let's look at it this way: the building down there on Albany Street in Tampa, where Championship Wrestling from Florida was housed, that place is called the Snake Pit.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
That's not considered a positive naming. It truly was. Some of the stuff that happened in there.
I can't wait till we get to that. There's a lot of things went on in that place. Probably some you can't ever repeat, but look forward to the stories you can tell.
I think that I can couch my language in such a way that I can almost tell a complete story.
Okay.
I just wanted to repeat that you mentioned a couple Hall of Fames, Pro Wrestling Hall of Fames. The Tragus Thez Hall of Fame is for both amateur and pro wrestling. You have to have been decent at both. Mm-hmm. And they're also affiliated with the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. The Tragus and Thez Hall of Fame is at the Dan Gable Museum. Dan Gable, for those of you who might not know, there's no reason all of you should know, but Dan Gable is probably the best wrestler this country's ever had, amateur wrestler. He won a 72 gold medal at his weight. He wrestled 6 matches, including against 2 former world champions. Never had a point scored against him. One of the best wrestlers ever. So to be in his Hall of Fame museum with his name on it is a real honor. And then that Hall of Fame is also associated with the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in Norman, Oklahoma, which takes care of all wrestling, high school and college wrestling in the United States, all amateur wrestling. And the fact that they would have an organization that half of or everybody in it worked as a pro wrestler is truly telling. I mean, usually amateurs wouldn't come anywhere near the pros. So that's a real honor to be there. But I'm also in my high school, my college Hall of Fame, and in the National AAU Hall of Fame. And the reason I'm not bragging, the only reason I'm telling you this, and the reason I mention my private life as a father and as a member of our, as a Cub Scout leader, as a member of our society, is towards my character. I don't think a person with low character could achieve these things. I just don't think that people would reward me with Hall of Fame memberships if I was a scumbag. I just don't think so. So, okay, enough said. Now we can move on. What should we talk about now, Ray?
Well, I mean, we can go anywhere you want to go. We'll start from the beginning here in a little bit, too, because I have a few questions about early on. But before we do any of that, I also wanted to go back just really quick, and I'm not trying to bring this up or anything like that, but you were talking about the NWA, the Monopoly, and all that good stuff. And you were talking about Fuller and Kevin Sullivan and things, and then you were talking about all of the things you did after wrestling. People don't even realize that these guys exist after they retire from the ring. Some guys can't let it go. Some guys just never look back. And Bob, I think you kind of really never look back to some degree. You still respect and appreciate the time you had on the road and all of your college, being in the Olympics back in '68. I mean, my God, not a lot of people can say they did that, representing their country in the Olympics. So, I mean, you've done a lot of things outside of professional wrestling, but it just kills me because we had this big plan of attack, how we were going to address everything on the first show, how we were going to begin the first show. And then you got about 9:30 a.m. I get this text, and to quote my good buddy, the late great Tracy Smothers, another former pro wrestler, you sounded about half hot. Tracy used to say, "I'm half hot." Everything made him half hot, and you sounded half hot. I'm like, oh my God, I've been talking to you like constantly for 2 months. I've never even heard this side of you before. You dropped an F-bomb in a text. I'm like, oh my goodness. And so I was like, how are we gonna? What's this first show gonna be about now? Has everything changed? Yeah. And you had a little bit of time to cool down, but you addressed it and things of that nature. And basically what upset me about it was to know the Bob Roop now, and I'm assuming from the last 30 years plus, for people to dwell on things that took place 45 years ago, still to this day, or tell it their way, instead of maybe opening their eyes and seeing that, we all, as we age, we all, hopefully mature, and we can see things a little differently or from other people's perspectives. But it's like we talked about this off air, and I'm sure we'll get into it when we get there. But it's like you weren't the only one involved in all of this, but somehow you became the bad guy in all of this. Like, you led everything and you forced everyone to do everything that they did and yada, yada. It's just funny how the narrative turned to that. And, you know, it breaks my heart because I know kind of a, you know, person you are. I can't say back then, but I know, you know, who you became after wrestling. And clearly, like you said, that was a good point too. You had all these years, you worked hard in high school and college, and you made it to the Olympics. I mean, you're a focused human being. And so for everybody to just look at it, and I went on YouTube, for instance, there's a couple of people that like to get these interviews with these former wrestlers, and their entire point of existence is asking them controversial questions. They want the hits. Right. They want the ads. So it's right away. Kevin Sullivan's on Joe Blow's podcast. I won't say his name. And the first question, the only question is, tell me about the Knoxville 5, that whole situation back in the late 70s in Ron Fuller's territory in Knoxville, where you guys, you know, a bunch of you guys decided, hey, we're not getting fair pay. We're going to go try to do our own thing over here in the same city. God forbid. You can't do that. They own that city, right? Monopoly you were talking about. But it's specific to your name. All these other guys, you know, and some have passed away. I'm not trying to, you know, no derogative, you know, but Ronnie Garvin was involved. Bob Orton Jr. was involved. There were so many other guys involved, guys that had been in the business forever. Ron Wright even kind of jumped over there, and he knew the Fuller family forever. The great Malenko, Boris Malenko, you know, who had been around the business for quite a while. So it wasn't, you know, just Bob Roop that did these things. And that's what kills me too, is that it's just, you're the bad guy. And I start reading the YouTube responses. Bob did it to himself, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, what, like, these stories are told so much that nobody really knows the actual facts, the whole story behind it. I'm not talking about this is my version, this is your version. I'm talking about everything that came out of it. And maybe at the end of the day, people can believe who they want to believe when the story gets told here, but at least they'll have enough facts from your side that I'm hoping that they go, okay, I kind of see that now. You know, and they can still make their own decision. Maybe they're just a Fuller fan. Maybe they're a, you know, whatever, an NWA, you know, for life type fan. It could be whatever. I'm just saying, at least, you know, when you tell it from your side, at the very least, maybe they'll come out of this going, oh, okay, well, he wasn't doing it with like trying to destroy, you know, the other promotion or whatever the case may be. Just trying to do your own thing. So I wanted to get that out of there because it kind of upset me after it upset you. So, and I know some of those interviews are a little old, like a year or two old and things like that, but still just not very cool. Just seeing some of the responses, people they never bothered to spend the time getting the entire story. They just listen to one narrative, and that's sadly, that's the main narrative that's out there. And unfortunately, and I'm going to end here so I can let you tell your story. This is the Bob Roop show after all. The last thing I wanted to say was I went back. The first thing I did when we decided we were going to do this was I watched every interview you had done, every shoot interview, shoot interview is what I'm talking about. Not kayfabe promos, but I went and everything I could find. So you did Brisco and Bradshaw recently, but I also went back. You did a couple hours shoot interviews, about 4 hours worth at the very least. And I just listened to all of that because I wanted to integrate that into all the research I was doing. That's when I go back to this one text. You sent me one sentence, one time, and it made my day. I mean, I was going to do this show anyway, but I was like, okay, we are definitely on the same page, because what you said was, I want to tell my story completely and accurately. And that's what I'm all about, is accuracy. So I'm glad we're going to do that here, because some other people, maybe some names you've already mentioned, like to tell stories that they remember, and you can easily go back and see that those stories are not true. I'm not saying they're lying. Maybe they just remember it that way. But, that's not going to happen here. I want to be very clear with everyone. Anything we do here is going to be completely and accurate. And that's what this show is going to be all about.
Well, that's a good point. And to give credit where it might be due, maybe some of the stories that are being told are presented only from one point of view, that they don't have the information that I have. They didn't know where we were coming from. Now, Ron Fuller, that's not the case. He knows why I'm here. And you mentioned Ron Wright a minute ago. Ron Wright and I became buddies. He had been there. He'd worked for 5 or 6 different promoters. And Ron was a guy that was working back there in the days of live TV. And Ron told me stories that when he and his brother worked as a tag team, they did live TV. When they worked on a TV, they would pack their bags once they got dressed to wrestle. They would put all their civilian clothes in their bags, and as soon as their match was over, they'd run out to their car and take off because they got such heat in their match. Again, it was live. People were seeing it as it was happening. That if they stayed there, the first time they stayed there, they had 100 people drive down to the TV station waiting outside with baseball bats, waiting for them to come out. It took them all afternoon to get out of there. So they had to get the police come get an escort out of there. So after that, they'd run out of there real quick and get out of sight. Well, so Ron had been there a long time. He knew what was going. He's the one that pointed out to me in a couple of towns that money was being handled inappropriately. I'm not going to say thieving and stealing. I'm going to say inappropriate money accounting for the money that was coming in.
Right.
And I saw it myself. I saw it with my own eyes in 2 different towns. And I went to Ron Fuller with it. He denied it. So he does know where I was coming from. And so he never mentioned that. He never mentioned, one of the problems I had with Bob Roop is he came to me and accused me of being inappropriate with the money. He never mentioned that. If he'd mentioned that and said, well, I denied it and, it absolutely wasn't true, he's never said that either.
And you're talking about Ron Fuller here.
Ron Fuller. Now, that's kind of an important item, don't you think?
Well, yeah.
That my motivation was that my beef with him was that I was getting, as a booker, I was getting a percentage of every house. So if he let's say that somehow $5,000 every week was unreported. In other words, it wasn't accounted for. It was just taken out in a paper bag in cash, say. Well, my percentage of that $5,000 was $250. So if I'm getting cheated out of $250 every week, over a month's time, that's $1,000. Over a year's time, that's $12,000. That's serious money. And plus, we were the one earning it. Ronnie Garvin, Boris Malenko, and I were like a brain trust, and they were the 2 brains, and I was trusting them. I was a booker, but those guys both had years. Malenko had 20 years more experience than I did, and Garvin had 10. So with my 8 or 9 years together, but the 3 of us came up with these great programs that were really, we did stuff that just excited everybody. We were selling out everywhere. And, so that when you're selling out and your pay doesn't go up that much,
it's noticeable, I would imagine.
Yeah, very noticeable. And again, Ron was the one that came to me and pointed it out. I saw it with my own eyes. So
Ron Wright, you're talking about.
Yeah. Now, Ron Wright.
Well, we got 2 Rons in the story. I just want to make it clear.
Right.
For those who don't understand what Bob's talking about, real quick, Bob, just for those who may not know, the reason you refer to you guys as the brain trust is because Ron Fuller was actually running 2 sides of a territory. So he was up in Knoxville, but he was also down in Pensacola at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And he wasn't even in town 3 or 4 days a week. And we were running these shows. I wasn't having to go see him at all until these improprieties come up. He would come to Knoxville because we did a show there locally. So he would be there for that. But I still ran the shows when I was booker. He didn't interfere with that. I had a program going. Again, it wasn't me. It was Malenko and Garvin had these great ideas. Ronnie had been a booker up in Canada. They did all kinds of wild stuff out there in French Canada and
Montreal.
Montreal, and with the Rizzo brothers and all that. So they had some great. Malenko had years of experience as a heel, so these guys had great input. I was able to kind of wrap it together, and sometimes I didn't have to do anything with it. All I had to do was just time it what we were going to do and fit it all into. You had out of every hour on TV, you had 48 minutes and 50 seconds, and the rest of it was 60 minutes of commercial time. And I had to figure out how to get that and the matches and the interviews all into that time. So I was just kind of a choreographer, I guess you'd say. And I did have some ideas, but those guys had some great stuff. So, we were a brain trust. Bobby Orton Jr. wasn't really keyed in that way. And Dick Slater was with us too, but He was Orton's buddy. I didn't know him that well, and
we'll get like wherever that. Orton wound up, Slater was there at some point as well. Those two guys, man. I can only imagine.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's another story. But I think that again, going back to wanting to reach out to the people who have shown interest in my career that come up, I still think it's one of the funniest things to be at a reunion where someone who doesn't know me walks by and I'm shaking hands with a guy and his son or his father standing next to us, and he's shaking my hand and smiling, got both hands on mine and going, "Oh yeah, we used to hate your guts." And, he's shaking my hand with a big smile. "We used to hate your guts. We hated you so bad." And, it's a big compliment because they were talking to my work as a heel. And that was my job, to make them hate me. And, but, now, of course, they understand what the business is. And another thing that I want to make a point here. One thing that they mentioned, Fuller mentioned, was this tape, this Plan B, did not come out. It didn't come out. It didn't come out until a year or two ago.
Yeah, I don't think he was aware of that. I saw him do an interview or something, or I think he was wondering how it got released, but it really wasn't released. Somebody did release it, but it wasn't like it never aired on TV or anything like that. But again, even though you there's more than just you on that video, it just seems to go back to like you held a gun. I'm not saying it figuratively. You held a gun to everybody else's head in that interview, apparently, because you're the only one that gets name dropped when he talks about that.
Right. Well, shall we go? Why don't we go to me starting out in the wrestling business? I think it's interesting. Eddie Graham. Let's put it. I was getting ready to graduate from college in 1969, and the Olympics had been the summer before, the fall before, and I came back. I had two semesters left of school to graduate. I was graduating in June. I was looking for a career, and I wrestled that year in college, my senior year. I was team captain that year and voted team captain by my teammates, which was an honor. And when I was looking for, I was graduating, I'm going to need an occupation. One of my teammates came back from Christmas break, and he said, "Hey, I ran into a pro wrestler, guy named, you remember Larry Heinimi?" And Larry Heinimi, I had remembered him from the '64 Olympic tryouts in New York. Now, this is 1968. And he said, "Yeah." I said, he's big. He was driving a Cadillac. He's got bleach blonde hair. He had on a diamond ring, a nice coat, nice clothes, with a Rolex watch. And I said, "Yeah, really?" I said, "What's with that?" He said, "Well, he's a pro wrestler. He got into pro wrestling." And I said, "Really?" I thought, pro wrestling. And they said, "Yeah." He said in 2 years, he made $75,000. And that part was okay. But then he said, and he's been to Japan twice, and he's been to Australia twice. When I heard that, I said, because coincidentally, we had a team trainer that the year before I spent a lot of time with. I had a bad knee, and he was giving me therapy every day. He would ice it down and, do some treatment on it, where I got to know him pretty well. And he kept telling me he said, you'd be if you're interested in pro wrestling. He said, "I know Sam Muchnick. I know a guy named Sam Muchnick. I don't remember how he knew him, but he did." He said, "I can call him and set it up. Maybe you go talk to him." So he had told me that the year before. So once I heard this thing about Larry Heinimi becoming Lars Anderson and going to Japan.
I was going to say, make sure everybody knows who luscious Larry Heinimi went on to become, one of the Andersons. Yeah. He worked here as Larry Heinimi early in his career in the Cleveland area for Pedro Martinez and Johnny Powers and things. Yeah. I think he was even part of that early IWA stuff as well. But, obviously he became Lars Anderson. So, but yeah, he worked here some. It was before my time, but my father remembered him. So under that name. So I always found it amusing that, somebody my father knew from the Cleveland territory, which was a territory at the time, guys. Unfortunately, it folded pretty abruptly, pretty quickly. After that, he would go on to become much more famous as Lars Anderson.
Well, think about it. Lars and Ole Anderson and Gene Anderson were a top tag team. And once they started a six-man tag thing started taking off. It's like it was tag teams had gotten, just everybody was used to it. So the six-man tags, well, once he was put in with them, he started making main event payouts right away because nobody was making that kind of money. And at the time, maybe the champion, the NWA champion, and the very top guys. But anyway, the trainer set me up for an interview with Sam Muchnick, which was about 100. St. Louis was 110 miles away from Southern Illinois University, where I was going to school. And a teammate of mine who I was the Greco-Roman heavyweight in 68. He was the freestyle heavyweight in 1968. Both of us, he had already graduated. I was about to graduate from Southern Illinois. One of the most notable that a small school like Southern Illinois could provide the heavyweights for an Olympic team for both freestyle and Greco-Roman.
Right.
It's pretty telling.
Yeah, that's
no
crazy.
School, Oklahoma, none of the Oklahoma schools or Iowa, none of the great schools ever did that. So that was noteworthy, and a great coach we had. Well, Larry Kristoff was this guy's name. He was second in the world. This guy was tremendous amateur.
This is the guy you went down there with to go meet with Muchnick, Larry Kristoff?
Right.
Okay.
And it was Sam Muchnick had an office. I don't remember what the building was, but he had his office. He had all kinds of awards and plaques and things from his being a newspaper writer and the other things that he had done. And so we go we've got a meeting with him. We're going to talk to him. And one of the first things he said was, he said, "You're a college graduate," he said to Larry, and he said, "And you, Bob, you're about to graduate." I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, if you guys I wouldn't get into pro wrestling if I were you." This is the head of the NWA, the president, telling two guys that are Olympians
right.
that he doesn't think we should get into pro wrestling. So I found that strange, but I shrugged it off. Anyway, he set us up. He said, there's two promoters that like amateur wrestling, Verne Gagne up in the Minnesota area and Eddie Graham in Florida.
Well, Verne had quite a background himself in amateurs.
Yeah, he was an alternate. He was a national champion. He was an alternate on the Olympic team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was terrific. He was a great amateur. I never got to know him. I talked to him one time. We were both in the Tragos Fez Hall of Fame, and later on I got to talk to him a little bit. But he was in his senior years, having senior moments at the time. So it wasn't. I don't know if he would well, he's gone now, but I know his son Greg, and I like him. But
I didn't mean to make you lose your train of thought. You were talking about Verne and Eddie Graham. Sorry.
No, I got it. Thanks. Yeah, I grew up in Michigan, and I walked to school in 7th and 8th grade in the snow. So I didn't want to go up to Minnesota and go to work. Florida, I went to spring break my senior year. I went to Florida and I liked it. So I said, "Well, why don't you call the guy in Florida?" So he called Eddie Graham. He talked to Eddie. We didn't talk to him, but he did. And we were having a tournament about, I think, a month later in Detroit. It was the last tournament I was ever going to wrestle in. It was a 1969 National AAU, which is the Amateur Athletic Union, Greco-Roman National Championship. And Larry and I were both entered. I cut down to 220 because I kept having to wrestle Larry, and Larry was about the only heavyweight in the country that could beat me, but he did. He could. It was always close, but he would beat me 1-0 or 2-1 or something. So I cut down to 220. I hadn't won a national. I've been second, third, fourth. I was 5-time AAU All-American, but I'd never won a national championship. Well, this was my last chance. So I cut down to 220. And anyway, wrestled the tournament. I won. And Eddie Graham said he was going to come to this tournament and he would meet us there. I don't think he ever got there while I was wrestling because I would have seen him. But I left after my match in order for me to win. Mm-hmm. There one more match had to take place, and I was so nervous about it. If it went a certain way, I wasn't going to win. So I was so nervous about it. I went across the street and got a beer. I think I'd been cutting weight for 3 days. So when I came back, I found I had earned the championship. And Eddie was there with Buddy Fuller, one of his partners in his business.
Who was the father of Ron Fuller, ironically.
Father of Ron Fuller. Eddie was, boy, you talk about flamboyant. He was tan. He had that bleach blonde hair, really colorful clothes. He had a big gold watch with a big gold his gold watch band had like silver or gold coins, like the gold pieces.
Right.
In his watch band, he was just flamboyant as he could be. And wrestling is pretty conservative, really, amateur wrestling. So at the banquet that night, the awards banquet, I was sitting at a table with Eddie and Buddy. I was thinking, he really stood out. It's like those movies where they show something, one part of it in Technicolor and everything else is black and white. That's what it was like sitting there with Eddie. And to my surprise, the guy in charge of the Detroit Athletic Club that had sponsored this tournament was also the president of the National AAU for wrestling that year. He was the head guy for AAU wrestling. And they don't stay there forever. They take his, but that year he was the president. So he was a big wig, and I mean he was a well-known name. His name was Dean Rockwell, and so I'm sitting there and waiting. And Dean Rockwell said, "I want to thank somebody in our audience who's been a real friend to amateur wrestling. If he had not contributed, we might not have been able to have this tournament here today. I want to announce Eddie Graham." I mean, I could have fell over. I mean, I thought, my God. So Eddie stands up, and everybody gives him a big hand and everything. Well, think about it from my point of view. Here's a guy from pro wrestling who is like another universe from amateur wrestling.
Sure.
But he's getting this tribute from the head guy in this amateur wrestling thing as somebody to really, it's the only person. The Secretary of State for the state of Michigan was there to give the awards. He didn't give him a big plug like that. So Eddie got that big plug, and I thought Eddie was legitimate to me when I went into it.
Right.
Which was bad. That's not a good thing because his credibility, he had a lot more credibility than he should have had with me. But
so you knew of Verne's amateur status, and it seems like that would be the easy go-to for you. But Florida, it sounded better. Well, the nice hot Florida sun sounds a lot better than the cold barn up in Minnesota. I get it. And then this solidifies it for you then, Eddie Graham being put over by the amateurs.
Right. And he was friendly, and Eddie was a con man. Any good...
Well, he's a promoter.
Any good wrestler is, and promoters are even better because if you're conning a bunch of con men, you got to be a really good con man to con the conners. Yeah, but the other thing was Sam Muchnick had mentioned that Jack Brisco was one of the stars down there in Florida, and I knew of Jack. I had never met him, but I knew of him. He was a national. He was an NCAA champion at 191.
Right.
I'd been years before. I'd been in service at the time, I think. But anyway, I knew he was there. Dale Lewis was there. Dale was
wrestler, two-time
Olympic team member. So there were some great amateur wrestlers down there, and I felt right at home once I got down there. But yeah, so that's how I got started in Florida, and once I got there, they started training me, and I should tell you about my first shoot in the ring because it was an absolute abortion.
Now before we get to the ring, because I want to say that, remember now, this isn't just a shoot interview. We're not just here for 2 hours. We're here for years. So I want to hit on everything. So I want to ask you a question before we get to your first match, because people are probably like, damn you, Ray. He was going to tell us about his match. We'll get there, guys. I do promise, Bob. We might even get there right after this. But you talk about training. What was training like? I'm not asking you if they made you do squats. I'm not asking you if they showed you how to do this or that work. I'm just curious back in these days, because they were very tight-lipped about, there's a lot of guys that have told stories like, I didn't even realize it was complete work until I got out there for my first match, or until I saw this or I saw that. When they brought you in and you started training, how did training go? Did they tell you right from the get-go, all right, this is what we're going to do so that it alleviates the actual pressure from the arm bar or whatever the case may be? Like, what was training back then for an amateur like you?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question because it takes me back to Eddie Graham. One of the things that I said about having more credibility with me than he should have, if I had been like a little bit leery, like he had no connection to amateur wrestling, and I said, well, okay, I'm in a completely different business here, because it was. Amateur pro wrestling had nothing in common.
Right.
I would have been less susceptible to any conning. What Eddie did was he talked to me like pro wrestling was kind of a noble calling. we were going out there and we were providing entertainment and suspense and drama for our fans, and we were giving people, a chance to blow off steam vicariously, and all these things. It made sense. It's like almost, Bob, what you're going to be doing is like this noble endeavor. You should be really, which I didn't mind that at all. But no, something else that was going on. Once I got down there, even while I was training to become a pro wrestler, I started working out there was a wrestler at the University of Tampa. He had been a national champion, a small college national champion twice, but he was a 191 pounder. And even when he was at full weight, he probably didn't weigh over 210. So I worked out. I went over to work. He was getting ready to go to some kind of tournament, or he needed somebody to work out with. So Eddie found out about it, and he took me over there. I went over to the Tampa University to their gym. They had a big wrestling mat. And I worked out with the guy a couple of times. Well, I weighed about 270. And, I just fresh from the Olympics. And so the input or import of me being 270 was I had the strength that went with that size. And this kid at 210 had a hard time doing anything to me. I could defend myself from him very easily. So that left him just one option, really, was what I could do to him. And I was able to, I had a bunch of, I was good as a freestyle wrestler, too. I took third, I was All-American in that at the AAUs a couple of times. It's just, again, I had that Larry Kristoff. He was my nemesis. Whatever tournament I was in with him, I never could beat him, But to his credit, he not only was on 6 or 7 World Games team, he actually went on to become a coach of the national team that went to the World Games.
Now, Larry, was he deterred? Like after Sam Muchnick, that conversation, or did he actually go try to train? Did he have a first match, or was he just?
Yes.
Okay, I was just curious.
we went down. Thank you for taking me back because I got a step.
That's right. It's like Eddie, I said, we're here forever, man. So we're gonna hit everything.
Okay, good. Hope you folks out there are bearing with us here. I'm old. I'm 81. My brain still works, but. Maybe not as well as it did 25 years ago. Eddie brought us down to Florida for a look-see.
Okay.
Come on down. He flew us down, not first class or anything, but he did fly us down. He paid for it. And Larry and I flew down, and we flew down to the matches in Tampa. And first time I ever went to a wrestling match. So we were standing. They didn't want us in the dressing room, and I don't blame them. So we stood out. It's a Fort Homer Hesterly Armory.
Right.
There's a balcony and there's a railing at the balcony. It's a great place to watch the matches from. And we stood out there and watched the matches. And a couple things I noticed that were of import to me was that even when, during one match, Mario, a wrestler he was a manager at that time named Mario Galento.
Oh, what a character.
What a character. He could heat. He had a cane. He went out there and he did something. He poked somebody with that cane when they were hitting the ropes. He hit him in the back, or he poked him in the back. And I thought the audience was going to tear him apart. He had cops over there protecting him. But even when everybody was going nuts, I noticed the cops, they weren't laughing, but they were kind of smiling. Right. They weren't, because what you just saw was assault and battery. When he poked the guy with a cane, if we do that in the street, you go to jail for that.
You get away with a lot of things near the wrestling ring, that's for sure.
Well, so what I said to myself, well, of course it's not real. The cops are laughing about it. I didn't think it was, but I know that you can't hold a guy by his wrist unless you know serious hand pressure holds, the nerve endings and that. You can't hold a guy by his wrist. Even if you got two hands, you can't hold a guy by his wrist if he wants to get loose. You can't. You can't do it. Amateur wrestling, even Hodge with that grip of steel couldn't hold somebody. So, you could get free. You had your other hand, you poke them in the eye, or, you kick them wherever. You could get free. So the guys that would get in these holes where they were just held by one arm, I looked at that. I said, well, a lot of this stuff wasn't possible. So I knew it was a manipulation. Well, in a business, of course, called it work. But and that didn't bother me. Okay. I wasn't going to go into business where I was going to beat up for real every night. I mean, who would want to go do that?
Right.
You know, so, and that was fine. You know what? It also gave me this. I want fans out there to understand this. I had the utmost respect for what those guys out there were doing. Why? Because I couldn't do it. I don't care about being an Olympian. That didn't transport. That did not carry over to pro wrestling.
Right.
All it was it gave me credibility. But what credibility do I have if I get in the ring and I stink? I can't get, I can't get out of my own way. People say, hey, go back to the amateurs, pal. You ain't cut out for the pros. So I had utmost respect for everybody who was in that dressing room, was higher up on my pecking order than me. I was at the very bottom. That's the way I looked at things.
You hear that, workers of today? You hear so many guys breaking in now. Just teach me how to take a bump, teach me how to hit the ropes, and I don't need anything else. And here's an Olympian, literally an Olympian in Bob Roop, and a national AAU champion coming into pro wrestling and saying, hey, I'm totally aware that I've never done this before, and I don't care if this guy over here, maybe he doesn't have a college degree, maybe he never wrestled in amateurs, but what he's doing is something I don't know how to do, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut and open my ears and learn. And that's very important. And it's very cool that even though you have the background, you had an amateur, you realize this is a different animal altogether. And I know one thing is I don't know anything yet, and I'm going to learn from all these guys.
Yeah. Yes. And the other thing I realized was that in the ring, any one of those guys could make an absolute fool out of me simply by doing nothing.
Yeah, sure.
Because all they had to do was do nothing. If they didn't help me, and this was even after I learned to work, I learned how to start learning to work. You don't learn to work till you get in the ring. But once I got even to the point of getting in the ring, if I didn't have a guy, and that's something we'll get into later on, but the guys I worked at and some of the guys I worked with when I first started, I had great matches with, and other guys who were bigger and stronger and nastier looking than someone else, like Frankie Cain was 5'8", 5'9", 180 pounds. I had great matches with him, and then I go against someone else who's 6'4" and 280 pounds, and have lousy matches with them. And so I learned early on it had nothing to do with what you look like. It's what kind of ability you got in the ring. Frankie I'd worked with, he had that Mephisto gimmick with the loaded boot and the mask and all that. Mm-hmm. He had people worried about my health, that I was going to make it through the match alive. And I took that as a real, it gave me credibility.
Sure.
Even when he beat me, people would say, "Good match, Bob. You almost had him." I had credibility.
Right.
I'd beat other guys who were lackluster, and just didn't have it. And I'd go back to the dressing room almost with my head down. People would go on, you're lousy. You need to go back to amateur wrestling. You suck. And, nobody wants to hear that when you're trying to get over. So, I learned to admire that guys like, it's what you know. It's not what you look like. So
you and Larry fly down. You get this look-see. You see this Mario Galento. Are you guys talking to each other like, look at this, man? Do you see this? I mean, how is that conversation going between you two when you see these shenanigans going on at ringside with Galento and things? Are you guys maybe going, is this for me or is it not for me? You seem to be interested. Is this where Larry kind of goes, I don't know about this, or does he show up for training as well?
Good question. And thanks for getting me back on course. Larry and I watched the matches. Actually, Larry worked, you asked earlier, did Larry work a match? Larry worked a match that night.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They wanted us to work, and I don't know how. I wasn't sure I wanted to, but Larry actually looked better than I did. He was older. He was more rugged looking. He was rugged, and he had a bigger reputation.
Okay.
So they picked Larry, and Larry got some tights and boots somewhere. He went down and he worked against a masked wrestler. I wish the heck I could remember his name. Gordon
Nelson?
Gordon Nelson. Oh,
okay.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah,
what a team we make.
Mr. Wrestling, Gordon Nelson. Not Tim Woods, but the other Mr. Wrestling, Gordon Nelson.
Had the white mask. Yeah, Gordon Nelson. You and I are a great team already. I had tried and remembered his name the other day. I remembered he was married to.
He's one of those unsung heroes of the era. He was he could shoot a little bit there.
He was a shooter. Yeah, he could shoot. Well, I don't know if he was mad at Larry Kristoff or having to work with him or what, but Larry went out there. He didn't have a clue what to do, so he was listening to Gordon. And Gordon had him do a couple things and Gordon was a heel. Anyway, he had Larry, when he put Larry in a hold, he had Larry go for the ropes, which, a babyface shouldn't do. I mean, if you're brand new, and plus Larry looked like Larry was about 50 pounds heavier and had a solid muscle. Although, that wasn't that big a difference. I mean, guys, you didn't have to be big. I mean, Louie Tillet was working then, and Louie was small and terrible shape, and he had credibility. It didn't matter. It wasn't what you look like. It's what you had conveyed to the fans about you.
Right.
Little guys can be tough. You don't have to be big to be tough. So one of the toughest wrestlers I ever knew was 115 pounder. But Larry went out and worked a match. Afterwards, we were staying at a hotel on Dale Mabry Boulevard, and Larry and I shared a room. And Jack Brisco was delegated to kind of chaperone us or host, be kind of a host. And he took us back to the room, and we were supposed to ask him questions and everything. And Larry asked him a question. I left something out. Before we went to the matches that night, Eddie took us down to the Tampa Tribune, and we met with Tom McEwen, who was one of the head sports writers there. And they took some pictures and did an article on us being there. Two Olympians down there was fairly unusual. They were smart of Eddie, because
I was going to say, it looks like Eddie's trying to help you guys up, and really it's just bolstering championship wrestling for Florida at the same time.
Of course. Yes, credibility, yeah.
Yeah.
We've got these two Olympians that are coming down wanting to get involved in our business here. Yeah, it gives serious credibility. And they were credible. He when Eddie was sober, all the years he was sober, the wrestling business had very high credibility.
Right.
That's another thing we'll get into, is why he hated the little fly-by-night, so-called what he considered fly-by-night promotions.
The outlaw promotions?
Well, and the wrestling schools, the wrestlers who would have school would train guys and smarten them up, and then send them over to Championship Wrestling for Florida to get a job. That's another story about a shoot with Danny Hodge, Khosrow Vazari, Billy Robinson, myself, Bob Orton Jr., all brought in to work out with one poor kid that just graduated.
That sounds just terrible. I can't wait till we get there, but I already feel sorry for this kid listening to some of those guys involved. Vaziri, another great amateur in his right, Iron Sheik, if people that don't know that his real name. And, of course, you and some of the other names. Who else did you say in there?
Billy Robinson.
Oh, my God.
He was working down there at the time. And, overkill. I mean, if some kid the size of Andre the Giant, who was an NCAA champion, it might need 5 of us, but not for this poor kid. He weighed about 180 pounds. He had been trained at a local school and come over thinking he could get a job, and they were going to discourage the hell out of him by beating the crap out of him. I didn't have anything to do with it. I just happened to be there for a few minutes, and I watched what was going on. And basically, the guys. Let's save that story for later.
Sure, I'll earmark it right here in my notes. I can't wait to get there. We're going to tell everything kind of in order. We might sidetrack here and there, but yeah, we'll get back on pace. But can't wait till we get there. This poor guy. I'll put that in my notes right now. Poor guy.
You kind listener out there, please do bear with me. My story.
Well, you get excited. You remember something. I mean, I'm putting it in my notes so we don't forget it. Absolutely, man. Because I can't wait till we get there. But it's a nice little teaser. I promise, guys. You know what, Bob? Let's make a pact right now. Episode 2, we're going to tell that story so people aren't waiting to see when it happens. We'll make sure we fit that in next time around, guys. But for right now, we'll get back on track here. So you go down there, you talk to the local newspaper, the writers, and it's so cool that you remember all their names and things too. It adds so much more detail to the show. But so here you are after the show, Gordon Nelson, who was now, I'm thinking maybe he was like a Mr. X, a Dr. X, something along those lines there at that time. He probably goes in there and has his way. Not that Larry couldn't handle himself in the amateur world, but you're in the ring and the pros in front of all these people, and he probably did show him up a little bit, or maybe he had a rough go of it. But it's all over, said and done. You're back at your hotel room, and Jack Brisco stops by.
Let's go back to the ring for a minute. I don't think they put Gordon over. I think Larry Either they went 10 minutes through. I don't think so. I think Larry beat him somehow, or maybe he got DQ'd. I don't remember. I know they weren't going to beat Larry.
Okay. So Larry, anyway, maybe that's why Nelson was a little salty with him. Maybe he knew he was doing a job to this guy who had never wrestled in the pros before. Could have been.
Exactly. But you know what? That's their job.
Sure.
If you're a wrestler, that's your job. Whoever I did jobs for female wrestlers. I did a job for a female midget. So, wow.
I'll add that to my notes as well.
Or little person.
Right.
I put over in the ring. It's a work. Anyway, I mean, that's your job, is to be good enough to do that and keep some credibility.
Right.
But anyway, one of the things that Jack Brisco, I think he drove us because we didn't have a car. I think Jack drove us in his car back to the motel. Okay. And he came in. It was a Tuesday night, and Tuesday night was party night for the wrestlers over at the lounge over there. Everybody went to Imperial Room, I think it was called. And yeah, that was a big hangout for everybody. And Jack was probably eager to, maybe not. He had a girlfriend. Maybe he was going home. But anyway, he asked if we had any questions. And Larry, he asked what we expected to make. And Larry said, I wanted to start. Now, this was 1969. He said, I'd like to start with making $40,000 a year. That would be the equivalent of about $100,000 a day in $1969.
Oh, probably. Probably. Well over that.
Maybe even more. Well, Jack had just gotten his first break, and I don't know if he'd made $40,000 a year yet there in Florida. Right. Now, he did, and he went on to be champion where he made some serious money.
Right.
But, Jack probably his first year, he might have made $15,000, the second year of 20, third year 22. He wasn't making that kind of money. Plus, you're on the road all the time. You're really earning that money while you're learning your trade. So when Jack heard that, he wasn't disgusted or anything. He realized we were marks, but he just said, well, I doubt very seriously. Now, I had heard Lars Anderson's story from my teammate, but I wasn't in it for that. I wanted to do it. I didn't care about the money. I wanted to travel. So I was going to go. I was convinced I was going to go in. I had a degree. I could always fall back on my degree. If things didn't work out, if I didn't like it or it rejected me or whatever, I couldn't make it. I had a degree to fall back on, but I was going to give it a try. That story about Lars Anderson talking about going to Australia twice and Japan twice in his first 2 years in the business, that caught me. I said, yes, that's what I want to do. And that's what happened. I mean, that worked out. So, I was going to go. But Larry, when he heard that, when Jack discouraged him, he said, no, you won't make, you'd be very, very lucky to make that kind of money anytime. It'd probably take you a few years. Larry went back and he had a coaching job. He was coaching wrestling at Southern Illinois University, had a branch campus at Edwardsville, Illinois, and Larry was coaching the wrestling team over there. He went back to that, and it was good. He did. He was a great coach, and like I said, he ended up coaching the World Games team. It was funny because last year I was inducted into the Southern Illinois University or Athletic Hall of Fame for wrestling, and I went to the awards banquet, of course. It was kind of cool. They had a football game that day. It was in the fall. And at halftime of the football, we went out on the field, and or maybe it was during a break. But the game was being televised. So we went out on the field, all the Hall of Fame inductees, and we stood there and were introduced. It was kind of cool. It was the first time back to school since I graduated in '69. I'd been gone all those years. Well, Larry was at the banquet that night, Larry Kristoff. And I hadn't seen him all those years. I hadn't seen him once.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so I recognized him. I mean, he didn't look quite anywhere near the same, but I could recognize him. And I sat at a table with him. We talked and we caught up and everything. But what I noticed, I got inducted. Larry and I were both on the 1968 Olympic team. I got inducted into the SIU Hall of Fame in 2022. Larry got inducted in the Southern Illinois Hall of Fame in 1988.
Wow.
Yeah, 34 years earlier than me. Well, and I told that story when I gave my acceptance speech. I said, look, I laughed at it then too. I said, I guess his career might have been more illustrious between me and Larry. He got inducted 34 years ago, it was a way to put him over, because if I hadn't had him to work out with, I never would have become a pro wrestler. I wouldn't have been good enough.
Right.
I never would have had the option. I wouldn't have made the Olympic team. So,
well, it's cool. You ran into him all these years later, though, because I was going to ask you, do you know what happened to Larry? And there you have it.
Oh, he's still there. Seems to be. He's a farm boy. Literally, he's still on a farm. I think he owns 3 or 4 of them now. He's doing real well.
Okay.
But he's a completely different kind of guy than me. I don't know if Larry's ever. He might have had a beer. I know he's never had a joint or any kind of drugs or anything. And you get in a pro wrestling life, and that's something else we'll talk about, the seamy side. But it's something that people should know about. The fans that go to the trouble of coming all the way across the country to a get-together, fly in, drive in, whatever, come in to talk to you and want to find out what you're doing now. I say, like going back to talking about Eddie Graham and Gordon Solie at that seminar at Charlotte, and never talking about behind-the-scenes stuff. Just,
right.
Oh, yeah, he was the greatest announcer and the greatest promoter and all that. No, there's another whole story here. What was really going on? We're talking about what you saw on stage. What's behind stage? Behind stage is that big theater with all the dressing rooms and all the rigging. About 25 people and the support crew. The gaffers and the stage hands and all that, the costumers and all that. What's going on with them? And I think that's what people want to know, and that's what I want to share, because that was what was real. What made it happen? It wasn't us being out in the ring. What got us in the ring? How did we get there? So that's where we're going to be going down the road. So, okay, where was I? Larry, we flew out the next day, and Larry decided not to go into it. I'd already committed before I even went down there. I knew I was going to try it unless something horrible happened, but it didn't. You want to ask me? You got anything you want to ask before I go any further, Ray?
No, I'm just, you answered pretty much some of my questions I was going to ask you. So it's kind of right where we need to be. Larry moves on. He decided not for him, but you decide this wrestling thing, it's for me. You stick around and you're going to travel the world. And really the next question I had for you, and I don't know if it's going to tie into where you're going next, was just getting started. Some of the guys that maybe you got in the ring and trained with down there in that snake pit. I'm assuming, I don't know if Eddie Graham was getting in the ring himself and showing you anything. I'm assuming he had some other guys doing that. Maybe the Briscoes down there or something along those lines. I don't think Hiro Matsuda was doing anything like that yet, was he?
Not quite. He was involved, but not like that. I'll get to that in a second. I remember the guy I trained with almost, it seemed like every day, was Sputnik Monroe.
Wow, there's another name.
Yeah, all he was doing, he was teaching me like how to tie up and the headlock and, just
the basics.
Get me used to the basics, just to be able to get around the ring and getting in and out of the ring. You better know what you're doing, or you'll if you don't, you can trip over that second rope and fall into the ring on your face. Yeah, you need to get used to the ring. A ring is a snake pit. That's a snake pit right there. The ring can cripple you if you're not careful.
Right.
So you get used to the ring, what the canvas feels like, taking bumps, hitting the rope will leave bruises on your side until you get used to doing it. You build up that area, or you learn exactly where to hit the rope so it doesn't you don't get any meat or muscle in there. But all that takes conditioning to get used to. When I retired, about 6 months after I retired, I got back in the ring to work out with, I think, Ron Simmons or somebody, breaking in Ron and maybe just Ron. But I did some of that stuff, showed them how to hit the ropes and do some other things. Next day, I was sore as it could be. I was sore, like I'd been beat up. You need to learn your way around the ring so you don't get hurt. And then what you're learning when you're working out with another man or whoever is so you don't hurt them. It's not only not hurting them, you have to be able to deal with them in a way that allows them to do what they need to do. In other words, you can't get a headlock and have it on so tight the guy can't move.
Right.
He has to be able to move and wave his arms. And, if you're squeezing so tight, he's going to grab your wrist. He's going to grab your right wrist with his right hand and your left wrist or your left elbow with his other hand from around your back to loosen your grip. And nothing's going to happen as long as you keep trying to squeeze his head like a pimple. So
right. You got to be able to work. It's a work, guys.
Yeah. And, when guys are young in the business, they don't understand that that's what you need to do. You need to, you have to tell the guy, look, I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to hold me like you're worried I'm going to try to get away. I'm not going anywhere.
Let me take, I don't want to cut you off, Bob. I'm sorry, man.
That's all right.
Let me take you back to Sputnik real quick, because he's pretty well known, obviously throughout history. He didn't really make it to the TV era as far as videotape goes, so there's very little of him that's out there, but a very well-known guy. But when Sputnik was in there showing you all these things, was he pretty cool to deal with, or was it like a job to him? Was like, all right, kid, this is what we're doing, and have a good day, and that was the end of it? Or was Sputnik, was he helpful in getting you into the actual wrestling ring in front of the fans? Did he get you prepared?
Oh, he was great. He was great. Well, I rode with him. When I started working, I rode with him. Sonny King, a wrestler named Sonny King, was. Now
he didn't train you, did he? Because
no, he was part of our group. Sputnik and Sonny and I, usually Sonny or I would drive, and Sputnik would ride in the back seat. But he would school me, and him, Sonny a little bit too. Sonny was green, I think. He would school me in the car. He would tell me what I did later for Lex Luger, but he would school me in the car. He would be telling me, psychology and, why you're doing certain things. And yeah, I hung around with him during the day too. I'd go over and, I was trying to, assimilate wrestling as much as I could, and hearing stories. But Sputnik, oh, what a character. He came over from the Carney.
Right.
He wrestled on the Carnival at the athletic show. And he told me a story how one time he took on 16 sailors, one after the other. And the way the Astro worked is they would have a tent, and they'd have a wrestling ring in the tent, and there'd be a stage out front, and the Carnival Barker, I think sometimes they call him the gaffer, would be out there with a microphone, or a hand amplifier.
Right.
And he'd be trying to get people to wrestle. And you'd have a wrestler or two, or a boxer, maybe both, out there. And anybody that can beat them, you beat them, you get $25. If you last 3 rounds, you get $25. Whatever, they'd have different. Would have different incentives. You try to get somebody to take the bet, or the try for the prize, and then everybody that wanted to go in the tent and watch had to pay a quarter, nickel, whatever they charged. Back in those days, sometimes a nickel or a quarter, was equivalent of like a couple bucks today. But Sputnik, there was a group of sailors. He told me about one time that he would insult them one after the other, and he ended up taking all 16 of them one at a time. And he never, he didn't cripple anybody. He didn't break anybody's bones or anything, but he would put some kind of submission hold on them and make them give up, and then and then shake your hand and all that. He wasn't vicious until the last guy. I think he put him out. He was a real character, and he had a real rapport with black fans and black folks in general.
Yeah, he played a big part in segregation there in big cities.
Yes, and and he was a sweetheart. He didn't have a prejudice bone in his body. The guy was a good man. He had some personal problems, like all of us do, but he was a good guy. He was a good mentor, good guy.
Well, you got in around a lot of showmen. I mean, you were watching Mario Galento at ringside. Eddie Graham is the promoter here. Sputnik Monroe, for as tough as he was the Cadillac and Diamond Ring man as well. So all of these guys, outside of just being tough or whatever you want to call them, Sputnik included in that for sure. But they're all showmen too. So you're getting that aspect of the business if you're watching these guys. And like you said, you were stepping back and learning from these guys.
Talk about a showman. Sputnik told me another story about working with Danny Hodge. He said he was working with Danny Hodge, and Danny was smart to the business, but he was so conscious of his image as a great amateur, one of the greatest. I mean, they named the NCAA Most Valuable Wrestler every year at the tournament, the Danny Hodge Award. So he's one of the greatest ever.
Right.
Yeah. So Danny he was a junior champion out there in Oklahoma where he lived for years and years. the NWA Junior World Champion at 220. And Sputnik was working with us. So he was working with him one time, and he hit him with a gimmick or something. And Danny went down like he was knocked out. So Sputnik made the mistake of strutting. He's strutting around the ring. Meanwhile, Danny's laying there on his back watching that. And Sputnik said he got too close to him, and Sputnik reached out and grabbed him around the ankle. And Danny, one of his gimmicks was his grip. He would do things like squeeze apples to where they would, he would just pulp an apple in his hand, which try that sometimes. Yeah. It's very difficult to do. And he had this grip. And my understanding was that he was a genetic anomaly. He had double tendons in his hand.
That's what I've heard. I don't know if that's just the story that goes around or whatever the deal is, but man, I know he had quite a grip. Yeah.
So he grabbed Sputnik by the ankle and he squeezed. And Sputnik said he's standing there flapping his arms like a flamingo. He's yelling, "I quit. I give up. I give up." He's standing there. Danny Hodge is laying on the canvas like he's knocked out. Got him by the ankle, and Sputnik is the one that's screaming, "I quit. I give up." I mean, to me, that's a funny story.
Oh, it's a great story. And it's a story that would have been lost in time if it wasn't for you telling it right here. And that's another thing I wanted to get over on this first episode. So I'm so glad you told a couple of Sputnik Monroe stories, because this show's not just going to be about what Bob Roop did in the ring. It's going to be about everything you witnessed behind the scenes, all the different characters and people, and the stories they told you and shared with you. I know you went up and down the roads with guys like Ronnie Garvin and such over time, but it's great because I didn't even know these were coming, these Sputnik Monroe stories, and maybe some more will pop up over time as well. But man, so here you are. You were an amateur. You were a Greco-Roman Olympic wrestler. I mean, you've done it all in the amateurs, and then here you go over to the pros. You meet with Eddie Graham. You buy the hype as far as, the promoter bark goes. And here you are. You've decided, unlike your buddy, Larry Kristoff, this is going to be for me. And you stay down there. You get trained by some of the best. Sputnik, great stories. Can't wait to talk a little bit more about him, hopefully. But I feel like this is a good way to wrap up the first episode, Bob, because I feel like at the beginning of the next one, we're going to start talking about your time in the ring. And we'll also touch on that story about that poor guy who had to step in the ring with the likes of Billy Robinson and his company as well. I promised that to you. So I'll make sure we touch on that too next time around. But Bob, I think this is probably a good time to call it quits for the first episode.
Wow, Ray. Time flies when you're having a good one, isn't it?
Absolutely. So many more to come.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
So, all right, guys, you guys can actually find Bob Roop over on Facebook. Adam is your Facebook friend. He's not super active over there. Maybe we can change that a little bit, guys. But make sure you get a hold of him and let him know how you feel about this first episode.
That's going to change. I'm going to be a lot more active in the future.
And as always, guys, you can follow me on Twitter, or now it's called X, thanks to Elon Musk. You can follow me on X at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, I'm at Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. Please get a hold of us if you have any questions about this time period or any time period in regards to Bob Roop's wrestling career or anybody he may have interacted with. Looking forward to doing more and more episodes in the weeks to come. Lots more going to come out, guys. So just stay tuned. Bear with us. There'll be more about the Knoxville 5, the fallout in Knoxville, all of that good stuff in the weeks to come. No rush on any of those stories. We're going to try to go in order. Again, we may get sidetracked, but I loved a lot of the stuff we talked about here this week. I had a lot of notes, a lot of research done, but you had me taken off guard by a few of the stories you had to tell. I didn't know about them, so I'm glad you added those to the show.
Well, thanks, Ray. And folks out there, thanks for listening.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you one more time for doing this show with me. You got a hold of me a couple months ago. You said, I like your work. I think this could work. We had a couple conversations, and I just feel like everything you were saying was exactly what I was thinking. I felt like maybe it was vice versa too, not just in business, but also in personal life. So it's just a great connection. I'm glad, you got a hold of me. I got a hold of you, and I'm glad everything's working out. And we finally got here. We didn't want to do this until the time was right, until we were 100% ready. I know you had a little cold. I was dealing with I would call it walking pneumonia, I suppose. I'm getting over it. I'm almost there. And here we are. So looking forward to doing this again next week. Yes, guys, we will be back each and every week, once again with the Wrestling Stoop, with the legend here, Bob Roop. Bob, thank you once again for being here.
My pleasure, Ray. Thank you.